Councillor Edwards. Councillor Sabi George. Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Garrison. Councillor Janey. Councillor McCarthy. Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Wu. And Councillor Zakem. Madam President, we have 13 councillors present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I am informed by the clerk that a quorum is present. At this time, if all colleagues, guests could please rise. Councillor Edwards will have her clergy come up for the day. She will introduce her clergy, who will provide the invocation. I ask that everyone remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today it is my pleasure to introduce Pastor Matt Love from the Church of the Well in East Boston. Pastor Love is a transplant from Berkshire, California, who's come here and only amplified the mission of the Church of the Well. Its vision is to impact the city of Boston spiritually, socially, and culturally by giving back to the community through acts of service. So it is with my pleasure that I have Pastor Love here to talk about that mission and also to start our proceedings today.
Thank you. We moved out here roughly about 8 years ago with the whole goal of being an impact in the community. Our church is in East Boston, and we have 3 nonprofit coffee shops in downtown Boston. One that's inside South Station, one that's at 100 Summer, and the other one is just opened in October, is on the corner of Washington and State, right next to the old State House. Our goal is that we will be able to provide a comfortable place where people can come in and have a great cup of coffee, which we do. And then after that, after we cover our costs, the rest of the money is given back out into the community through various nonprofits. We pick a different nonprofit each month to showcase, and our whole goal is that we can allow people who are in the neighborhood or work in the city to purchase a cup of coffee and know that the proceeds after covering the cost go back out into the community that they're a part of. We appreciate it that we have been able to partner with over 36 different nonprofits in the Boston area, and we've come to love and notice how much Bostonians are caring and compassionate and desire to be a part of something that's giving back to their community that they love and share. I would like to say a few things before I pray. I would like to thank everybody that has taken on the heavy burden of being the person of this council room that has decided to lead the community, our community. Sometimes the decisions that you make in this room may go unnoticed. Sometimes you might receive scrutiny or praise. But we know that as your hearts are for the community and your hearts are for the neighborhoods, that the decisions that you are making are hopefully going to be impactful in the right way, taking us in the direction that is going to help us be progressive and also to help all of the community to grow closer. I would like to pray for us. If you would, please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity that we can come together, that the decisions that are going to be made here today, Lord, that they will be heartfelt, that they will be used wisdom. Proverbs 3:13 says that wisdom is more valuable than gold, more precious than jewels, and there's nothing that we desire that is greater than wisdom. I pray for the wisdom of this councilmen and councilwomen in the decisions that they make, that they will be beneficial for the community, that they will take the burden thoughtfully and prayerfully and consider all the things that are important in helping this community and our neighborhoods to grow stronger. We pray for strong neighborhoods, we pray for strong community, and we pray for a strong Boston. Amen. Now have a moment of silence. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I'm going to invite up Councillor Flynn, who has a special presentation.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the opportunity to present a special guest today before the Boston City Council. I want to introduce Director General Douglas Su from the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Boston for a presentation. Today is actually the 40th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act being enacted. This act provided the foundation for relations between the United States and Taiwan, and it allowed to have economic and cultural engagements. TACO is very active in our Chinatown community. They attend many events throughout Chinatown, but they also provide invaluable assistance to the Asian community, not only here in Boston, but throughout Massachusetts. Director General Su is someone that's respected not only here in Boston, but in Taiwan as well. Taipei and Boston are also sister cities. We are grateful for that tremendous relationship. We want to say thank you to General Director Su, and we are happy to have you here today. And on behalf of the Boston City Council, we do want to welcome you, and if you'd like to say a few words, please join us.
Well, thank you very much, Councilor Flynn, for the introduction, and Madam President, and all the city councilors, ladies and gentlemen. Well, it is indeed an honor for me to be able to once again speak on the floor of the Boston City Council. Not only as a Director General of Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Boston, but also as a friend. And I say this because over the years, TACO Boston has forged a solid relationship with the city of Boston, Massachusetts, and the surrounding communities. I assure you that Taiwan very much values this relationship, and thanks the Council for all the support you have shown over these many years. Today marks a very special day in the U.S.-Taiwan relations. 40 years ago to the day, in fact, on April 10th of 1979, the Taiwan Relations Act, or TRA, was signed into law by President Jimmy Carter. The TRA provides a ray of hope in a dark period for Taiwan when the United States decided to cut off the official diplomatic relations with the Republic of China, Taiwan, on January 1st, 1979. To many Taiwanese people, it was a time of uncertainty when it appears that we lost our, strongest allies and closest friends. Fortunately, however, the swift passage of the Taiwan Relations Act by the U.S. Congress brought a renewed hope for the U.S.-Taiwan relations. Over the past 4 decades, this piece of legislation has proven a success by ensuring the continuation of the robust relations. The TRA is considered the cornerstone for relations between our two countries, and in fact, sets a stage for Taiwan's continued relations with all 50 states across the United States and with great cities like Boston. At the local level, Taiwan-Boston relations provide a perfect example of TRA's success. As I'm sure you are aware, Taipei, the capital city of Taiwan, and Boston enjoy a meaningful sister city relationships for more than 2 decades. So much has transpired since then, of course, and our relationship has continued to grow. I believe it is even more energized than ever with the booming development of the life science, AI, and green energies, which presents even more opportunities for Boston and Taiwan's cooperation. As of now, in just 2019 alone, 2 mayors of the largest city in Taiwan, Taipei and Kaohsiung, visited Boston to further strengthen the relations. This shows how much we view Boston as a place of opportunities and our reason for taking concrete actions to turn such opportunities into realities. In fact, there are already many successful Taiwanese investments in Boston, and there are about 1,000 Taiwanese students study in Boston. And also, for Boston Symphony Orchestra, they just got their first ever Taiwanese assistant conductors. It's called Mr. Yu An Chang. By the way, he's gonna have his debut in the Tanglewood Music Festival this August. So it is really, when you look at the big picture of these many interactions that take place between Boston and Taiwan, that one begins to realize the significance of our relationship. Taiwan is not just a far-off country in the distance, but rather a reliable partner and an integral members of the community. I must say, the relations between Taiwan and Boston look bright, with possibilities for trade, investment, education, and cultural exchanges that are only limited by our imagination. The Taiwan Relations Act plays a major role in ensuring that special relationship between Taiwan and Boston will continue to grow even stronger. The TRA may be served as a bridge of friendship that link Taiwan and Boston. If you have any doubts, just consider the fact this year we will see the largest presence of Taiwan in the upcoming Boston Marathon next week, with about 200 runners from Taiwan is going to take that 26.2-mile track. So today we celebrate 40-year anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act. To be honest with you, I can think of no other place I would rather be than right here with you among friends to mark this occasion. May relations between Taiwan and Boston over the next 40 years grow even stronger. And again, thank you very much for your invitation and allow me to speak on the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll stay for a picture.
Thank you very much.
At this time, I'd like to invite Councilor Flaherty, who has a very, very special presentation.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd also like to call our colleague, District 6 City Councilor Matt O'Malley. And also, I know that Jerome Smith is here, Chief of Civic Engagement from the Mayor's Office. If Jerome can join me, along with our guest of honor, Anthony Pisani, and his beautiful wife, Amelia. If you would like to come up and join Anthony, you are more than welcome to do that as well. So I have the, come on up, Amelia. I have the pleasure of introducing a friend and a gem of a guy and a tremendous talent and a tremendous resource for our city. Mr. Pisani was born in Cambridge, but two great parents, Anthony and Josephine Ann. He attended Beverly High School and excelled in baseball as an infielder before becoming a resident of the city in 1961. He married Amelia DiGastino in 1967. They've got two children, Amelia Bianca and Giancarlo, and two grandchildren, Olivia Pisani Riccani and Eleonora Pisani Ricciani, who are both from Arezzo, Italy. and now reside in Boston with their parents. His foundation as an architect is rooted in his education at the School of Museum of Fine Arts and also a diploma with honors from the museum school. He has worked at several world-renowned architectural firms. He also worked on major projects in the U.S., Puerto Rico, Canada, Mexico, Ireland, and Japan. He's no stranger to the city, and he's also no stranger to the City Council. He began his service to the City of Boston in 1987 upon his retirement to the Boston Landmarks Commission, serving as its vice chairman until 1995, and continued serving the residents of Boston upon his appointment to the Zoning Board of Appeals in 1997. During his time, he served with honesty, integrity, and excellence, carefully analyzing details before making a decision on thousands upon thousands of plans here in the City of Boston. And with no disrespect to current Zoning Board of Appeal members, he earned the reputation as being a voice of reason at the Zoning Board of Appeal for the City Council. So it is with great honor that I recognize Anthony's retirement from the Zoning Board of Appeal. It ended on March the 29th of 2019, and celebrate his time, energy, and efforts on behalf of the City of Boston and on behalf of the City Council. Would like to proclaim today, April 10, 2019, as Anthony M. Pisani Day in the City of Boston. So congratulations. And we, go right here. And just like to introduce my colleague, City Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. What more can I say other than he was a wonderful member of this body whom we lost far too young, Brian Honan, who would often refer to every other Tuesday as the day that he would lose votes and lose friends at the Zoning Board of Appeals. And we have a lot we can learn from Anthony because you can clearly see he never lost any friends. He served this city with honor and distinction since Tom Menino's first term on the ZBA and even longer than that. He will be dearly missed, and what fashion sense he brought in addition to a level-headed. Bow ties never look so good, so congratulations, Anthony and Amelia.
Thank you very much.
Oh, of course. And please join me now in welcoming the Chief of Civic Engagement for the City of Boston, Jerome Smith.
Thanks. So I had the fortunate experience of having two different sides of having the ability to working with Anthony. I used to be a neighborhood liaison way back in the day for the South End Bay Village, and I learned a lot about things that you should look for when you're doing community processes, and had conversations with the board back then. And so I just know that Anthony's 32 years of service has been very valuable to the city in kind of guiding the way that both community process was done, but also how you looked at plans and how you would challenge questions, and then how we just got fond of this one sentence you would always say, and everybody crossed their fingers and waited for you to say that the plans are adequate. And everybody just waited for you to say that, being like, that part is done. But I want to thank you again for all your hard work and everything that you've done. You've always had great character, but you also did a great job of balancing residents' public rights, property rights, and against the community, not against the community, but also valuing what the community had to bring forward and trying to find that balance. And you did a good job between the two. And so I really do truly want to thank you for everything. And on behalf of the mayor, all the mayor liaisons that are sitting upper deck in the chamber today, myself, thank you very much for everything.
Well, part of this is what happens when you come from a large Italian family. No, it has been, honestly, a great honor and pleasure to have had the opportunity to serve the city, and not so much serve the city. It has been the fact that, in my view, the city has served me. The ability to have the opportunity to look at and understand and go into the different communities, all 22, and the opportunity to assist the single homeowner to work on projects that are multi-storied and for multifaceted, has just been an education for me. What has struck me through all these years is the incredible diversity and dedication of the people, that work for the city. I mean, the city councilors that Tuesday after Tuesday would sit in the hearing and present their local community's view. The BRA in their ability to examine and give large overview, examine every project. ISD in their ability to do the initial work. And most importantly, the incredibly dedicated staff of the ZBA that are often put in a difficult position when people do not understand what is actually happening. And many of the calls coming into the ZBA, in fact, are not bouquets, because people get very worked up, as they should, because they understand what is going on. But the ability of the ZBA staff to treat everybody with care and dedication and with a calm voice, and to allow the process to continue on in a fair fashion, I think is, for me, has been a great education. I thank you for the opportunity to do this. Okay. Oh, great.
Smelling hair.
I put my hands back.
Enjoy.
Hello there. Yeah, please, let's do that. Anthony, thanks.
Thank you, Mike. How's it been?
Hey, good. We're going out with the Glock. Hey, I just have to ask you, so D'Agostino's your radio, so from San Donato?
Sorry I was late. I think I'm going to give them a moment. Take it. Right, exactly. Oh, not which one? I just realized that. I could. Let's see what Madam Clerk says. Should I give him a moment, or should I just? I said, should I give him a moment, or just exit the building quietly?
We'll be going to lunch.
Oh, good for them. Thank you, Ron. I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you again. Thank you.
I love him.
Where's Ron?
Oh, my God, what am I going to do? I should have taken a cold tablet. My nose is running all over my face.
Madam Clerk.
Oh, you're kidding? Yeah.
I'm like, he needs to. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm like, we're going to continue our meeting.
Yeah.
Bring it outside.
Look at Frank.
Thank you. Thank you, you guys. Thank you to all of you. We still have a long agenda ahead of us. Thank you. And actually, before we jump into the agenda, thank you, you guys. I'm like banging the gavel. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Clearly, the party could go on forever. I just wanted to thanks again, Councilor Flaherty and Councilor O'Malley, for the special presentation. And before we get into our regular course of business, just want to quickly thank you. Just want to quickly acknowledge a group of folks that are behind Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Flynn, international visitors from the International Visitors Leadership Program, which is a part of the United States Department of State, or U.S. Department of State, I should say. So thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate it. And James, thanks again for your leadership and for always extending an invitation to our council meetings. Really appreciate you and your service. Thank you very much. And now moving on, and we do have a long agenda, so I want to be respectful of my colleagues' time. I'm going to move right along to the approval of the minutes. If there are no corrections to be made, the minutes from the last council meeting will stand approved. Seeing and hearing no objection, the minutes from the last council meeting are so approved. Moving on to communications from His Honor the Mayor. Madam Clerk, if we could read dockets 0622 through 0643 together, that would be great.
Thank you, Madam President. Docket number 0622, message in order for the annual appropriation and tax order for FY 2020, filed in the office of the clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0623, message in order for annual appropriation for the school department for FY 2020, filed in the clerk's office on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0624, message in order approving an appropriation of $40 million to the other post-employment benefits known as OPEB Liability Trust Fund, established under Section 20 of Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 32B, filed in the office of the City Clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0625, message in order approving an appropriation of $36,400,000 from the city's capital grant fund in order to provide funding for various transportation and public realm improvements. These projects are aligned with the goals of Go Boston 2030, the city's transportation master plan. The funds shall be credited to the capital grant fund from the parking meter fund, filed in the office of the city clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0626, message in order approving an appropriation of $247,675,000 for the acquisition of interests in land or the acquisition of assets or the landscaping, alteration, remediation, rehabilitation, improvement of public land, the construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, improvement, alterations, remodeling, enlargement, demolition, removal, or extraordinary repairs to public buildings, facilities, assets, work, or infrastructure, for the cost of feasibility studies or engineering or architectural services for plans and specifications, for the development, design, purchase, and installation of computer hardware and software and computer-assisted integrated financial management and accounting systems, and any and all costs incidental or related to the above described projects, for the purpose of various city departments, including Boston Center for Youth and Families, Department of Innovation and Technology, Environment, Fire, Neighborhood Development, Office of Arts and Culture, Parks and Recreation, Police, Property Management, Public Works, Transportation Departments, Boston Public Library, Boston Redevelopment Authority, and Boston Public Health Commission, filed in the office of the clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0627, message and order approving an appropriation of $42,405,000 for the acquisition of interests in land or the acquisition of assets or the landscaping, alteration, remediation, rehabilitation, or improvement of public land, the construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, improvement, alterations, remodeling, enlargement, demolition, removal of extraordinary repairs of public buildings, facilities, assets, work, or infrastructure for the costs of feasibility studies or engineering or architectural services for plans and specifications for the development, design, purchase, and installation of computer hardware or software and computer-assisted integrated financial management and accounting systems, and any and all costs incidental or related to the above-described projects for the purpose of the Boston Public Schools, filed in the office of the clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0628, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to enter into one or more lease purchase or installment sales agreements in fiscal year 2020 in an amount not to exceed $28,200,000. These funds are to be used by various city departments for the acquisition of equipment and furtherance of their respective governmental functions. The list of equipment includes computer equipment, hardware and software, motor vehicles, trailers, ambulance, firefighting equipment, office equipment, telecommunication equipment, photocopying equipment, medical equipment, school and educational equipment, school buses, parking meters, street lighting installations, traffic signal equipment, and equipment functionally related to and components of the foregoing, filed in the office of the City Clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0629, message and order for the authorizing the appropriation of $1,200,000 from the income of the George Francis Parkman Fund. The funds are to be expended under the direction of the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation for the maintenance and improvements of Boston Common and parks in existence since January 12, 1887, filed in the office of the clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0630, message and order approving an appropriation of $4,400,000 from the 21st Century Fund, also known as the Public Educational or Governmental Access and Cable-Related Fund, known as PEG, pursuant to Section 53F and 3/4 of Chapter 44 of the General Laws, to the PEG Access and Cable-Related Grant for cable-related purposes consistent with the franchise agreement between the cable operator and the city, including but not limited to supporting public educational or governmental access cable television services, monitoring compliance of cable operator with the franchise agreement, or preparation of renewal of the franchise license, filed in the office of the City Clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0631, message and order authorizing the Law Department's revolving fund for fiscal year 2020 to purchase goods and services for repairs to city property. This revolving fund shall be funded by receipts from recoveries for damages to city property caused by third parties. The Law Department will be the only unit authorized to expend from the fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $500,000. Docket number 0632, message and order authorizing a limit for the Mayor's Office of Tourism's revolving fund for fiscal year 2020 to purchase goods and services to support events and programming on and or around City Hall Plaza, to advance tourism and to promote participation in public celebrations, civic and cultural events. This revolving fund shall be funded by receipts from the payments for the use of City Hall Plaza Pursuant to City of Boston Code Ordinance 11-7.14, the Mayor's Office of Tourism will be the only unit authorized to expend from the fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $150,000. Docket number 0633, message and order authorizing a limit for the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture Revolving Fund for fiscal 2020 to purchase goods and services to support the operations of the Strand Theater. This revolving fund shall be funded by receipts from rental fees for the use of the Strand Theater. The Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture will be the only unit authorized to expend from the fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $150,000. Docket number 0634, message and order authorizing a limit for the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture Revolving Fund for fiscal year 2020 to purchase goods and services to support public art to enhance the public realm throughout the city of Boston. This revolving fund shall be funded by receipts from easements within the public way granted by the Public Improvements Commission. The Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture will be the only unit authorized to expend from the fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $150,000. Docket number 0635, message and order authorizing a limit for the Distributed Energy Resource Revolving Fund for fiscal year 2020 to facilitate the purchase of offsets of greenhouse gas emissions, which shall be associated with a portion of the electricity consumed by the city annually, and to operate, maintain, monitor, and expand the city's existing solar arrays in Boston Public Schools, combined heat and power facilities. This revolving fund shall be credited with any and all receipts from the sale of renewable and alternative energy certificates and demand response program revenues produced by combined heat and power units located at Boston Public Schools sites, and solar renewable energy certificates produced by the photovoltaic arrays. Receipts and resulting expenditures from this fund shall not exceed $100,000. Docket number 0636, message and order authorizing a limit for the Parks Department's revolving fund for fiscal year 2020 to reimburse for the administrative costs to those city agencies which enforce CBC Chapter 16, Section 1-9 and 1-9B, and for costs associated with licensing and registration. This revolving fund shall be credited with any and all receipts from all dog registration fees collected pursuant to CBC Chapter 18, Section 1.4, and fines pursuant to CBC Chapter 16, Section 1-9.9 and 1.9b. Receipts and resulting expenditures from this fund shall not exceed $200,000. Docket number 0637, message and order authorizing a City of Boston Center for Youth and Families revolving fund from fiscal year 2020 to pay salaries and benefits of employees and to purchase supplies and equipment necessary to operate the City Hall child care. This revolving fund shall be credited with any and all receipts from tuition paid by parents or guardians for children enrolled at the center. Receipts and resulting expenditures from this fund shall not exceed $750,000. Docket number 0638, message and order authorizing a limit for the Boston Public Schools revolving fund for fiscal year 2020 to repair and purchase Boston Public Schools computer technology, including computers, mobile devices, and instructional software. This revolving fund shall be credited with any and all receipts from equipment sales and repair fees for Boston Public Schools technology. Receipts and resulting expenditures from this fund shall not exceed $1 million. Docket number 0639, message and order authorizing a limit for the Boston Public Schools revolving fund for fiscal year 2020 to support the maintenance and repair for BPS facilities, including custodial and utility costs for extended building time, floor refinishing, landscaping, and building repairs. Receipts from lease, permit for use, and parking fees for BPS facilities will be deposited in the fund. BPS will be the only unit authorized to expend from this fund, and such expenditures shall not exceed $2,600,000. Docket number 0640, message and order authorizing a limit for the Boston Public Schools revolving fund for the fiscal year 2020 for Boston Public School transportation costs, including bus and public transportation costs. This revolving fund shall be credited with revenue received from the Boston Public Schools Department for provisions of transportation to groups and entities for field trips and activities other than transportation to and from school. Receipts and resulting expenditures from this fund shall not exceed more than $400,000. Docket number 0641, message and order authorizing a limit for the Boston Police Department revolving fund for fiscal year 2020 to pay salaries and benefits of employees and to purchase supplies and equipment necessary to operate police department fitness centers. Revenue from this fund is derived from monthly membership fees. Receipts and resulting expenditures from this fund shall not exceed $100,000, filed in the Office of the Clerk on April 8, 2019. Docket number 0642, message and order authorizing a limit for the Boston Police Department's revolving fund for fiscal year 2020 to support the K-9 unit training program for officers and police dogs from non-City of Boston law enforcement agencies. The Special Operating Division will charge tuition and other fees to outside law enforcement agencies for the K-9 unit. The tuition and other fees by outside agencies will be used to purchase training equipment, certifying instructors, update facilities, and provide funds for other training needs not otherwise budgeted. The Special Operations Division will be the only unit authorized to spend from this fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $75,000. And docket number 0643, message and order authorizing a limit for the Boston Police Department's revolving fund for fiscal year 2020 to support training programs for officers from non-City of Boston law enforcement agencies. The Academy will charge participating outside law enforcement agencies tuition for each recruit, police officer, or special police officer they send to the Academy. The tuition paid by outside agencies will be used to purchase training equipment, certify instructors, update facilities, and to provide funds for training needs not otherwise budgeted. The Police Academy will be the only unit authorized to expend from this fund, and such expenditures shall be capped at $50,000.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Dockets 0622 through 0643, just for a point of clarification, are the operating capital and school budgets for FY 2020. Those will be assigned to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Docket number 0644, message and order for your approval, an order accepting the provision granted in Massachusetts General Laws by Section 6 of Chapter 337 of the Acts of 2018. The provisions are for the adjustment of the city's local room occupancy excise rate under Mass General Laws, Chapter 64G-3A, and acceptance of MGL Chapter 64G 3D and B, allowing cities and towns to impose a room occupancy excise tax and community impact fees on short-term rentals.
Docket 0644 will be assigned to the Committee on Government Operations.
Docket number 0645, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $199,100 in a form of a grant from the FY19 Local Cultural Council Program awarded by the Massachusetts Cultural Council to be administered by the Office of Arts and Culture. The grant will fund Boston Cultural Council subgrants.
Docket 0645 will be assigned to the Committee on Arts, Culture, and Special Events.
Docket number 0646, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $50,000 in the form of a grant for the Radical Imagination for Racial Justice, awarded by the Surdana Foundation and be administered by the Office of Arts and Culture. The grant will fund the learning cohort working to establish philanthropic practices to support the implementation of Surdana Foundation's refined funding strategy.
Councilor Janey, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I seek suspension and passage of docket 0646. It's pretty self-explanatory, $50,000 grant, and it goes to support the radical imagination of racial justice, something that I'm certainly passionate about, and it supports the learning cohort, as the clerk has already suggested, so I'm seeking suspension of the rules and passage of this docket.
Thank you, Councilor Janey.
Thank you.
Anyone else looking to speak on this one? At this time, Councilor Janey, who is the chair of the Committee on Arts, Culture, and Special Events, seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket 0646. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0646 has been passed. Moving on, Madam Clerk, to reports of committees. If we could read those two dockets.
Together?
Do you want to read those together, Councilor Flaherty, or separately? If you could read those together.
Perfect. Docket number 0211, the Committee on Government Operations, to which was referred on January 30th, 2019. Docket number 0211, petition for a special law regarding an act relative to voting precincts in the City of Boston. Submits a report recommending the home rule petition ought to pass. And docket number 0314, the Committee on Government Operations, to which was referred on February 6, 2019, docket number 0314, ordinance requiring review of precincts in the City of Boston, submits a report recommending the order ought to pass in a new draft.
Councilor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Docket 021 is a home rule petition that seeks to allow the city to establish sub-precincts and, in some cases, additional polling locations in order to alleviate the crowds and lines in some parts of the city that have experienced significant growth and development. None of these adjustments will change any ward boundary lines, nor will it change any representation for the purposes of congressional, representative, senatorial, or council districts. It was sponsored by Mayor Martin J. Walsh, referred to the committee back on January 30th of 2019. The impacted precincts are in areas of our city that have seen dramatic growth, in large part to construction of new multi-unit residences. They are as follows: Ward 3, Precinct 6, which is in the downtown financial district and parts of Beacon Hill. Ward 3, Precinct 7, South End. Ward 3, Precinct 8, Chinatown and the South End. Ward 5, Precinct 1, Bay Village. Ward 6, Precinct 1, South Boston to Broadway Station through the South Boston waterfront. Ward 9, Precinct 3, South End. As a result of the information and the feedback that we gathered at the hearing, as Chair, I'm recommending that this matter, docket 0211, ought to pass. With respect to docket 0314, it was a proposed ordinance that seeks to amend Chapter 2 of the City Code by adding the appropriate committee of the City Council that will conduct a review of city precincts every 5 years. The report shall include information about population shifts, development in the neighborhoods, and impact of precinct size on polling locations, staffing, and election day operations, as well as other factors as necessary. Docket 0314 is sponsored by our colleagues and President Campbell and Councilor Wu. It was assigned to the committee on February the 6th of 2019. As a result of the information and feedback gathered at the hearing, the docket will be amended to add the Commissioner of the Election Department or designee to review the city precincts. The docket will also be amended from its original version as follows. The first sentence is amended by adding the phrase, "and the Commissioner of the Election Department or designee" after City Council. And second sentence is amended by adding the phrase, "and the Commissioners" after the term committee, and changing the term committee as it appears in the second sentence to committee. As Chair of the Committee of Government Operations, I recommend that docket 0314 ought to pass in an amended draft, and through the Chair and lead sponsors if they wish to add anything further. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Oops. Start with Counselor Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to say thank you to Councilor Flaherty for his important work and leadership on this issue. As Councilor Flaherty mentioned, many of those precincts are in District 2 that I represent, so I followed that debate very closely and engaged with City Election Department officials. Myself and Councilor Flaherty also advocated for many years, working closely with the city administration to eventually have a polling location down at the South Boston waterfront. So we are making great progress on that one as well. Ward 6, Precinct 1, physically is the largest voting precinct in the city. It goes almost from the Joe Moakley Courthouse to almost towards Andrews Square. So it has one physical voting location at the Condon School. So that would be great progress, adding another physical location down at the South Boston waterfront so voters can exercise their constitutional right to vote. And the other issue that I focused on during this debate is, since a lot of these are in my district, as I previously mentioned, I just want to make sure that the community that I represent, Chinatown, that their voice will be heard during this process, which I'm convinced it will. That voting rights is a human right, is a civil right, and that's something I take very seriously, as do everyone in this body, as does the mayor's administration. But I want to make sure that I will work hard and continue to work with my colleagues to make sure the voices of residents in my community, especially in Chinatown, that when it comes to voting, that's one of my top priorities. So I'm going to work hard to make sure that my constituents have equal access to voting as this debate continues. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Counselor Flynn. Counselor Wu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, for your partnership. I want to thank the chair for shepherding this through once again, or both of these dockets through once again. On the first one, just really fingers crossed about the State House. I think folks remember we had submitted this, passed it already as a home rule petition that Councilor Linehan and I had filed in 2017 and kind of went down at the State House. But there's a fairly limited window to get this passed in time for it to be effective for the 2020 elections, which is when we'll see the, fingers crossed again, humongous lines of people waiting to vote and wanting to ensure access there. So I know I will be joining Councilor Flynn in directing our voices up there to move this through, but would ask for everyone's support in doing that and thank the administration and the mayor for really pushing this again this term. On the second piece, I am thrilled. I think the focus on re-precincting now is so important, and it's so easy to not remember it until it's too late to actually do anything about it. Again, there's a limited window between now and when the census data comes back. And if we don't get re-precincting started, at least conceptually in this window, it will be too big of a task to actually get done in that technical window of essentially May and June 2021 to be able to finish re-precincting, to be able to do redistricting properly. If the precincts are too big, it makes redistricting too hard to handle because we'll be working from building blocks that don't make sense. So I'm eager to get started on this. The specific language does say that it gets kicked to the committee, which I assume will be the Census and Redistricting Committee, to start, mandated to start in the year after the ordinance is signed. So the Elections Commissioner and his team have already said we'll sit down to get that ball rolling as soon as this may go through and become law. And of course, that would be a very open process, again, to lay the groundwork for important work ahead in 2020 and 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Anyone else looking to speak? Thank you, Councilor Wu, for the partnership, particularly on docket 0314. Look forward to partnering with you, as well as every other colleague in the Elections Commissioner on the re-precincting conversation. And Councilor Flaherty, thank you for your leadership in getting this done quickly. And a special thank you to Christine for drafting the language, putting together reports, particularly on docket 0314. It was innovative, it was creative, so thank you as well. We'll take each docket separately. For docket 0211, Councilor Flaherty, who's chair of the Committee on Government Operations, seeks acceptance of the committee report and passage of docket 0211. All in favor of passage say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0211 has been passed. For docket 0314, Councilor Flaherty, who's chair of the Committee on Government Operations, recommends acceptance of the committee report and passage of docket 0314 in an amended draft. All those in favor of passage say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0314 has been passed in an amended draft. Moving on to matters recently heard for possible action.
Docket number 0518, order for hearing regarding enforcement of the Boston Trust Act.
Councilor Zakhem, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Just yesterday, I believe almost all of our colleagues attended in person this hearing we held with, among others, Boston Police Commissioner Gross, advocates from the ACLU, from workers' organizations, including folks who had been the subject of improper immigration enforcement actions, in my view. It was a thoughtful, I think an important hearing, and I think we had a great opportunity to talk about moving forward. As was stated by myself and others during this hearing, it was not intended to find fault with actions that had occurred in the past, with individuals, with members of the Boston Police Department, but instead to make sure that in the spirit of the original Trust Act of 2014, which this body unanimously passed, which Mayor Walsh signed, which was groundbreaking at the time. 5 years have passed. We have a different administration in Washington that just this past week has purged the entire leadership of the Homeland Security Department because they are not tough enough, aggressive enough, cruel enough when it comes to immigration enforcement. I think it's very important for cities like Boston to be looking prospectively, not just on making sure that we have enforced our rules on the books, but how we can make them stronger to ensure that our city resources, our city employees, whether it's the police department, the schools department, anyone in the city of Boston is not unnecessarily cooperating with immigration and customs enforcement for what are civil immigration violations, for what are often racially motivated immigration violations, for a host of improper uses. So I do think we had a philosophical agreement with that, with the administration. I certainly intend to keep this matter in committee, as there is still some information, and it's later on the docket for today, 17F, that we filed, seeking more information on the police department, on the city's interaction with immigration and customs enforcement. But also, aside from that, I do intend to work with the administration, with advocates, and with you, my colleagues, on updates to the Act, amendments, whatever we want to call it, to go further and to make more changes to ensure that we're not going to have officers of the Boston Police Department working with ICE to pick someone up for a civil immigration violation when there's no other crime involved. We're not going to have people in this building doing that. And I don't think it's widespread. I want to be clear on that. I don't think there are widespread issues at this time. I don't think people are violating any of our current rules. But we have to be thoughtful. We have to be proactive on this. And I look forward to working with all of you on that. I do want to thank Commissioner Gross, Sergeant Detective Gallagher, the advocates, the folks that were here, including Mr. Martin Paz Flores, who had been arrested by ICE, who now has legal status, but who came and shared his story of his arrest, of his the abuses he suffered by his employer, who is now being sued by the Trump Labor Department for abuses, for improper action. So it's a really, I would say it's kind of a crazy confluence of events, but it is an important catalyst for us to act thoughtfully and proactively on this. So thank you very much. I will keep this in committee as we get more of these documents forward, but also intend to file legislation in concert with the folks I mentioned to update this act. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Zakhem. Councilor Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the lead sponsor for this, first for helping to pass the Trust Act and your leadership in 2014, but also for making sure that when we do pass an ordinance in the city of Boston, that the agencies that are tasked with following them actually follow them. I agree with your assessment 100%. This was not a moment where we were blaming the Boston Police Department for doing anything. But it was a moment, and it was a necessary moment for us to ask the appropriate questions. What is the point of a Trust Act if at the end of the day the Boston Police admittedly worked with ICE to identify a man, to tell ICE, immigration, who he was and where he was so that he could be picked up for deportation proceedings? That was not debated. That's what happened. And the question for us as a city council is, was that in the vein, and was that with the spirit of the Trust Act that we passed unanimously? I would say it's not. And I think that the conversations we're going to have with the practical realities that our police officers do have in trying to catch bad guys needs to happen. And I look forward to that working session. But I want to be very clear, and as I said during that hearing, the issue is the abuse of our police, the misuse of their resources and time. People have used it many times to exact bigoted, horrible things towards people of color. As we've seen in other cities, police are called on black men going to Starbucks. And what I'm saying and what we said during the hearing is that they're called on immigrants fighting for their rights, fighting to get paid. This is exactly what was happening. The man was injured on the job. He was leaving his workers' comp hearing. And ICE picked him up because they knew he'd be there, because the employer would have to be there and he'd have to testify. That is the silencing and rippling effect that we are trying to fight against. As Commissioner Gross said, that there aren't that many cases, and this case took so long to get here, so this is not a rampant issue. Just the opposite. I have been that lawyer many times representing that domestic worker, that man injured on the job. 2 men asked to come to the employer's house to pick up their paychecks. When they got there, they were arrested for trespassing. They were set up. That has a chilling effect on workers coming forward. I had to fight with my client to tell her to go to the hospital with a broken arm because she fell down the stairs taking care of a child. She was too frightened to go to the hospital to seek care because she was undocumented. The people who should be frightened about working or employing people without documents are not the workers. It should be the employers. And that's the conversation we need to be having at the City of Boston. If the Boston Police Department goes to deal with an employment dispute and they end up finding out someone is undocumented, I think there's a better process to make sure that person's rights are protected, but also our citizens, and also making sure everyone in the room is protected physically. That's what that conversation is going to do and has done starting yesterday. I also want to be very clear. We cannot allow for police resources to be used to union bust, to hurt workers who are striking, to also stop a worker from saying, I need to get paid for the work that I've done. And that's what will happen and continue to happen if we do not make sure that the Trust Act isn't more trustworthy and we don't fill in those gaps, and work with the police to help fill in those gaps. I want to also note that in some cases, the back and forth between myself and the commissioner was referred to as testy, was referred to as, there was some sort of tension. Throughout and afterwards, the commissioner and I have been in constant communication, and I personally walked him over to the advocates of domestic violence survivors, to the advocates of immigrant workers, to the advocates of immigrants in general, and he shook all of their hands and committed to working with each one of their nonprofits and talking with each one of their members to make sure that they know and feel that they are protected in the City of Boston. I think this is an opportunity to rise to the occasion, to make sure that we're an equitable city and we understand that no matter who you are protected, you are welcome here. So I look forward to that conversation.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Anyone else looking to speak on this matter? Docket 0518 will remain in the Committee on Civil Rights.
Docket 0194, order for hearing regarding an admissions policy and funding changes for Madison Park Technical Vocational High School and improving partnerships.
Councilor Sabi George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday, I held a hearing regarding the admissions policy and funding changes for Madison Park Technical Vocational High School with my 2 co-sponsors, Councilors Janey and Councilor Wu. I'd like to thank those of you that were able to join us yesterday and those of you who continue to advocate in partnership with us for Madison Park. Councilor Campbell in particular, Councilor Flynn, Councilor O'Malley, and Councilor McCarthy for being there. We were joined by Michelle Silveria, who's the Executive Director for BPS's Career and Technical Education Department, David Bloom, the Budget Director, Sam DePina, the Operational Superintendent for BPS, Kevin McCaskill, who's the Executive Director of Madison Park, and Shara Dukovnik, who is the Director of Turnaround and Transformation for BPS. Following their panel presentation, we also received testimony from NEASC, the New England Association of School Accreditation, or something like that. And they gave some testimony about their recent visit and review and evaluation of Madison Park, shared both some very positive findings as well as some, I think, really constructive feedback about what they saw and what Madison Park needs to be successful, to fully realize its success. We were also joined, I want to note, we were joined by maybe 30 to 40 teachers from Madison Park who really were impactful being in the room, being very good about sharing their feedback, not clapping out loud too much with the things that they heard. I think it's really important to note that because it shows the importance that the Madison Park School community at large thinks of what they think of their kids, what they think about the school's future success. We talked about the application process in particular. We talked about enrollment and Madison's goal to serve 1,500 students. There was once a point where there were 1,600 kids recently in that school. Many years ago, the school served about maybe 2,300 students. This coming school year, they'll have about 1,000 students in that building. We also talked a lot about funding, and the funding sources for Madison are mainly through the regular BPS process and Perkins money that comes directly from the state. We made a point to note that in this upcoming budget cycle, we will have a deeper understanding of some of the funding that will be going to Madison, especially some of the Chapter 74 fundings. I want to note that we look forward to following up with the application and admissions policy in particular, and hope to do that in the next month or so. I also want to note that we've asked a number of times individually as counselors. I've asked here and at school committee and at our Build BPS hearing that Madison Park be a part of the Build BPS plan, which to date it hasn't been, but at yesterday's hearing, Sam DePina did mention that Build BPS will include Madison Park and some of the significant renovations that need to be made over there as part of it. So I look forward to following up on that in particular. I'll leave it to my co-sponsors to share any additional comments from yesterday's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. Councilor Wu, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to thank my co-sponsors and back up the chair in her push to keep the conversation, the public meetings and working sessions coming, because I think each time, although progress certainly hasn't been at the pace that the community is hoping for and deserves, I think each time we have seen significant progress just in terms of honing in on issues and identifying next steps. And so I think the next step that we did lay on the table yesterday about revisiting the admissions policy, which had already been drafted, had already been brought up to the state for feedback and never implemented, revisiting that after giving BPS their month to review internally and have discussions, that will be a great next step and I think impact a lot of the other issues that the school community is looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Councilor Janey, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I just want to take a moment to thank my colleagues for their partnership and their leadership on this important issue, specifically Councilor Sabi George and Councilor Wu, but all of you for your commitment to Madison Park. Madison is in my district. So it is very important to the people who live, not just in my district, but certainly to all the folks throughout our city who are looking for high quality voc tech education for the young people in our city. It is such an important pipeline in terms of workforce development and entrepreneurship. And we've got to do more to make sure that Madison is successful. And I think we also need to do more to sing the praises of what is happening in terms of the good things that are happening in the classrooms at Madison, which are many. As you already mentioned, we had the educators here. There's a lot of support, a lot of people who care deeply. But certainly as a body, we need to be doing all that we can to ensure that they have the resources that they need and any other tools that they need. So I look forward to us continuing this work. This has been a long, almost a year-and-a-half process with my colleagues focusing on Madison, and I look forward to the continued work that remains. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. At this time, docket 0194 will remain in the Committee on Education. Moving on to motions, orders, and resolutions.
Docket number 0647, Councilor Edwards offered the following order regarding a text amendment for Boston zoning code relative to fair housing and integrated community.
Councilor Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Tomorrow, April 11th, marks the 51st anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. This is a signature piece of law and legislation, and it's also known as the Fair Housing Act. It was signed just 1 week after Reverend Martin Luther King was assassinated. It outlaws discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing. In doing so, it paved the way toward a society that is more just, more fair, and more equal. Today, regardless of who you are, where you come from, your age, your ability, whether you have children, your race, your religion, your gender identity, you have a right to equal treatment under the law, especially in housing. Fair housing has always been more than just about ending discrimination. It attacks systemic injustice. Since the passage of the Fair Housing Act, communities, states, and federal government have increasingly recognized the need to not only prevent discrimination, but also to advance policies and programs that create social equity and to eliminate those policies that obstruct it. In fair housing, that term is called affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is actually within the laws that we have passed at the federal government. We have an obligation as a city to affirmatively further fair housing. The federal government defines this as taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on protected characteristics. Today, in this council, as we contemplate the next 50 years of fair housing, I am proposing a civil rights amendment to our zoning code to ensure that we do just that. To be clear, the city has already taken important steps around fair housing. Our municipal code establishes a Fair Housing Commission. We have also decided to move forward with a fair housing plan that, despite a lack of leadership from the Trump administration, is going to continue in the city of Boston. Also in the administration's updated Housing 2030 plan, fair housing is acknowledged as a critical area for collaboration between the Boston Housing Authority, the Department of Neighborhood Development, and the Office of Fair Housing, Equity, and Advocacy Organizations. We know these challenges today that we face as Boston, with displacement, with segregation, with many of the issues, are deeply related to housing. We know that in many cases these challenges were built in planning and zoning. And one of the functions of government that most deeply impacts what gets built and how communities change is our zoning code. We need to make sure that zoning code has all the tools necessary to combat discrimination. In our planning process, we must assure we are building housing for families with children, ensuring access for persons with disabilities, and ensuring the inclusion of immigrants and people of color. We have to use public dollars and regulatory decisions, including zoning and public benefit negotiations, to ensure protected classes of residents share in housing opportunities. These are not options. This is not an option for us to deal with in terms of whether we'd like to or whether we don't want to. This is an obligation. There are obligations under the civil rights law. We are actually charged as the City of Boston with taking concrete, meaningful actions based on impediments and barriers to fair housing that we have analyzed and committed to act upon. Historically, one of the most effective tools for racial segregation has been our zoning code in the City of Boston and other cities as well. Zoning and planning has helped to concentrate poverty, has helped to exclude people with disabilities, and has certainly helped to drive displacement. As in, we intentionally did those things. Redlining, blockbusting, all of that is part of planning. All of that was within our hands. All of that was within our control. All of that we can undo and are mandated to. This is not an attack on developers, though some people already feel that it is. Instead, this is assuring that within our zoning code, we're going to require developers rise to the standard of a more equitable, just, and fair City of Boston. That's why we're putting it in the code. If we look at our data on income and race in neighborhoods like East Boston or South Boston, and we're planning new developments or whole neighborhoods right next to them for dramatically higher incomes, fair housing tells us we need to take another look. When the city negotiates for mitigation from developers, when we have a limited pool of funds to draw from, fair housing tells us we need to provide basic things like shelter before we improve neighborhood amenities. When neighborhoods receive better municipal services than other neighborhoods, fair housing tells us we have not done enough. The zoning amendment I am proposing creates a process for furthering fair housing as we review major development in the city of Boston. As I had mentioned before, we already have partners with DND and with BHA who have incorporated furthering fair housing in their everyday practice. As I also mentioned before, zoning has been the most effective tool at segregating our neighborhoods. So this amendment invites the BPDA and zoning to be part of the toolbox to undo the damage done by generations. It is requiring the BPDA and zoning to be at the table with DND, with BHA, and with the Office of Fair Housing, from its very rubric and how you analyze, how you plan, and the conversations that you have with developers. The BPDA has the check. The BPDA is the gatekeeper. Our zoning code is how we negotiate the future for the city of Boston. To not have the perspective of equity, to not have furthering fair housing as part of that conversation is a dereliction of duty, and it undercuts the already effective and movements that we have done in our other city agencies. Concrete examples of what we're going to do with this amendment. Well, during development review, we ask about transportation, we ask about tidelands. We're now demanding that we ask about civil rights. By amending Article 80, we can integrate planning and zoning into the crucial work already going on, as I mentioned, at DND and BHA. By addressing displacement in the zoning code for the first time, we can acknowledge residents' right to remain in communities they have built up and the city that they hold dear. The zoning proposal focuses on planned development areas because these developments cover thousands of housing units, substantial public benefit negotiation, and years or decades of development. It focuses on large-scale developments because they present our greatest opportunities and, in at least in one instance, Seaport, our greatest failure. Planning and developing integrating communities is achievable. As the district councilor for East Boston, I am not willing to sit by and watch the Seaport be replicated at Suffolk Downs. To that end, the zoning amendment creates a higher standard for public benefits in East Boston so that any future changes to the PDA at Suffolk Downs meets our community needs. It also creates fair housing standard for changes to any planned development area citywide so that modifications to these large-scale developments bring us closer to Boston's fair housing goals. So as we step forward in the next 50 years for fair housing, I am asking you to join me in this conversation about an overhaul of the zoning code to advance civil rights. We will do this in conjunction and with deep respect for the fair housing planning process the city has committed to. We will do this thinking of the future while acknowledging the decades of activism that brought us here today. I ask you for your partnership in advancing this zoning through the council through a deliberative public process and then on to the zoning commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Anyone else looking to speak on this matter or add their name? Madam Clerk, if you could add Councilor Flynn, Councilor Garrison, Councilor Janey, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Wu, as well as the chair. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Flaherty. Did I miss anyone? At this time, docket 0647 will be assigned to the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation.
Docket number 0648, Councilor Zachem offered the following. Under the provisions of Section 17F of Chapter 452 of the Acts of 1948, as amended, and any other applicable provisions of law that requested information in the following order be delivered to the City Council regarding communications between the Boston Police Department and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Councilor Zachem, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a follow-up, obviously, to my earlier summary of our hearing yesterday in the Civil Rights Committee. During the lead-up to that hearing, we did request a range of documents that would have been pertinent and useful, I think, in this body, examining what improvements are needed to the Boston Trust Act. 17F is an important aspect of the general laws that gives this body the ability to receive documents during our deliberations to make our decisions. I think it's been some time since we've had one. It's certainly the first time I filed a 17F, but I think this is important. I would ask that we suspend and pass this today to make sure that we can move forward swiftly on this, particularly as we're looking to get this information and create thoughtful policy moving forward.
Thank you, Councilor Zachem. Anyone else looking to speak on this matter? At this time, Councilor Zakam seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket 0648. All those in favor of suspension of the rules and passage say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0648 has been passed.
Docket 0649, Councilor Garrison offered the following home rule petition as an act regarding the need for a form of rent control in the city of Boston.
Councilor Garrison, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I filed this home rule petition as an act regarding the need for rent control in the city of Boston. I am sure it comes as no surprise for you to hear me say that there is a major housing crisis in the city of Boston, and individuals and families are being evicted, displaced at massive rates without just cause. Oftentimes, simply people of the greed and callousness of landlords. Although satisfactory shelter for our residents is a basic human right and a matter of personal dignity, landlords frequently refuse to compassionately assist their tenants to adequately maintain the basic rights for housing. I often say that elected officials talk about need for affordable housing in Boston, but the problem is that our concept of what is affordable housing in Boston is not real affordable in the real world. Working families and low-income residents in the city of Boston are forced to rent at extreme high costs and not offered acceptable subsidized rent. While the Massachusetts rent control prohibition initially narrowly passed on the ballot in 1994, 25 years later is a long time, and we find ourselves in a much worse housing crisis in our city today. It is good news that rent control ballot initiative authorized cities and towns to adopt forms of rent control for a 6-month period, after which compliance by property owners would be voluntarily. I believe now is the time to go steps further for the city of Boston through this home rule petition. The petition I am filing is a balance of rent control and concretely helps to address the housing crisis in Boston by holding landlords accountable, which also securing the rights of Boston residents to have real affordable housing. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor Garrison. Councilor McCarthy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I look forward to a hearing. I will sign on to make sure I'm there. Rent control has been an ultimate failure in the past. In my belief, it will continue to be a failure. In fact, in the long run, rent control as a permanent policy actually restricts construction of more units, as investors will continue to shy away as artificial caps are put on. Homeowners who have a 2-family like myself or 3-family like myself have no incentive to put new coats of paint on or redo the hardwood floors if there's an artificial cap on. And in 1996, Maureen and I, when we got married, we bought a 2-family home in Hyde Park. And our idea was that Maureen was going to work, I was going to work, and the house was going to work for us. And I don't think government should tell me how hard my house should work. I keep my house beautiful, obviously. I have great tenants, and my rent is under what I could be getting. And I think there's more people like me who want good tenants, who want to redo the paint and want to keep a great yard, than there are the opposite. So I'll be speaking continuously against rent control. I wasn't a big fan of the Jim Brooks Act either, but I'll be here through at least till the first Monday of next year.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Councilor Baker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. So I remember in Boston when if you got into property, a lot of times if you bought a 3-decker, the rents would not even pay for the 3-decker. So we spent decades, the 70s, the 80s, and 90s, right into 2000s without rent control, where the rents weren't even paying for the real estate that you owned. Much like Councilor McCarthy said, what we knew or learned today, $7 and $10 comes into our coffers from people that own their properties, and now we're going to ask them to provide more, over and above what they're already providing. $7 and $10 comes from people that don't own their properties. And I don't think it's the private landowners' issue to provide lower cost housing. That being said, but I also know people like myself that in the 80s, 90s, 2000s got into the property game, that are from the neighborhoods, that live in Boston, that provide good units at less than what they could get. And those, I think, are the people that will all either condo units that are affordable for people to live in, or they'll just sell their units off to the bigger companies. The more regulations that we're putting on those small landlords, you're going to see less and less of the small landlords. The big players will always be there, and they'll always pay what they need to pay. Whatever the regulation is going to be, the big players are always going to be there. It's the small guys, no pun intended, it's the small guys that are in the neighborhoods that are still providing housing for families that we know, that we put in there, that will take 500 less, will take 700 less. If a family's going to go into someone's apartment and be there for 10 years, it's much better having that person there for 10 years at $500 less than it is getting that extra 500, but every year you have new tenants coming in. People that are in the neighborhoods, I think, and I'm speaking for people that I know, they want stable buildings, and there's a lot of people out there, just because people are landlords doesn't make them mean, bad people. There's a lot of good landlords out there. You'll hurt them. We were here already. Our neighborhoods looked as bad as they did, mine I'm speaking of, looked as bad as it did because of rent control, because you could not afford to do anything on your house. The rents weren't covering anything, and that was even buildings that weren't rent controlled. We were not getting the rents to be able to pay for the buildings, maintenance. So I will not be signing on to this, but I will be at the hearing because I think it's something that can really hurt us. I remember the days, I mean, we're talking a lot now about the economy and $70, $80, $100 million extra coming into our account in the city of Boston. It's not always going to be like that. In 2010 and years before, when Maureen was in this seat here, the city was hurting, and the city, for more years in my life than not, was trying to pay its bills. And it was good leadership, like Ray Flynn back in the day, and even Tom Menino after him, that allowed us to get to that AAA bond rating. You'll see things like that are positives in the city. You'll see that sort of stuff chip away. I think we have to be careful with the regulations because I think, my opinion is, who we hurt is going to be the small guy that may own 1 3-decker or may own 2 3-deckers. If he's lucky enough or she's lucky enough, they own 3 3-deckers. And those are the people in Dorchester, Roxbury, South Boston that know people in Dorchester, Roxbury, South Boston and are willing to take a little less on their rents. That's who I think that we're going to hurt if we were able to pass a home rule and then have rent control back in Boston. I think it's a bad policy, and I just wanted to voice that opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I wanted to commend the maker for, I think, really having your, understanding your instincts and understanding that this is something that is bubbling up. I think recently at a hearing in Roxbury, our colleague, Councilor Flaherty, also called for an adult conversation about rent control. And I do think we do need an adult conversation about rent control. I will not be signing on to this because some of the language I'd like to change, and I'd like to make sure that we're working a little bit more on this particular home rule petition. The conversation, however, I think is very valid. The fact of the matter is, while I am too a landlord, I am too a small property owner, I am the first homeowner in my family. It's how I had wealth for the first time, is by owning property in Boston. That's why I'm still able to afford East Boston. So the concerns of being a small property owner are near and dear to my heart. And that's why actually I was dealing with a property issue this morning and missed, unfortunately, some meetings. The fact of the matter is, however, 65% of Boston tenants. If they were to actually form a tenant union in some cities where they have that, they would be the biggest voting bloc. They would, without a doubt, overwhelmingly, many of them would be voting for this. Majority of people in Boston rent. They are not property owners, and a lot of the property owners in Boston who would come against this don't live here anyway. They are here, they own here, but they don't live here. And I'm not saying, therefore, we should ignore them, but this is only going to get louder because the market is out of control. Working people cannot afford rent here in Boston. With 2 jobs, with both parents or partners working 2 jobs, can barely afford rent here in Boston. So this conversation is going to happen anyway. We might as well have it here in the city of Boston. Conversations happening at the State House. Representative Connolly and Representative Alaguardo have introduced a local option to allow for cities to have this conversation and potentially opt in to rent control. What is also important that we know, to note is, unlike my colleagues, and I will give them, Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Baker, the credit that they deserve, they were here during rent control. I was not. But I would say a large majority of Bostonians were born even after 1994 who are here, who are trying to rent. We're also not familiar with this, I guess, doom and gloom and horrible Boston that I never knew. Yes, I knew Boston in a recession, but I didn't know the Boston that they're describing. And I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm saying I didn't know it. I wasn't here. So I think a good chunk of Bostonians, including my chief of staff and so on and so forth, many of our chiefs of staffs and staff members who were born after '94 have no idea what that feels like and are in their mid-20s. What they do know is they feel like they cannot afford to stay in Boston no matter how many jobs they get, no matter how many great degrees they have from these excellent institutions. Boston is not welcoming to them because they cannot afford to stay because the rents are too high. So this conversation is going to have to happen. It's going to be one that I'm sure will be back and forth, but at the end of the day, I think we need to make sure that we understand what we stand for as a city. I believe all of us want this to be a city where a person can come, live, have a decent job, and afford to pay rent. That this could be a city that if you have nothing, you can grow to something. That's actually my story. I believe we all want this to be a city where the middle class is vibrant and growing, where families feel welcome, and that we're developing for them. So when we have this conversation, I hope we keep that in mind and we don't demonize each other, landlords who don't want this or tenants who do. We should not be throwing rocks at each other. I think we should be clear about what we want as a city. And I also want to be clear, rent control is not a one-size-fits-all. So this debate over the concept of it really doesn't meet reality. We have rent control right now. On city property that is developed, we have deed restrictions that caps the rent. That's a form of rent control. We offer incentives to developers all the time to take deeply affordable units, deed restrict them, and make them rent controlled every day. So when we're talking back and forth about rent control, let's see, it comes in literally hundreds of different ways. Land trusts, all of them. People opt in, they opt out, the incentives to get them there. So I don't want it to be a yes or no conversation. I do think we should understand the pain points for small property owners, but also the pain points for many of our tenants. So I look forward to the conversation. Again, in this form, I'm not comfortable signing on, but I am happy and very excited about the conversation, Councilor Garrison.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Janey, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I also want to commend the maker for bringing this piece of legislation forward. I, too, like Councilor Edwards, have some questions or concerns about the language, so I won't add my name, but I think it's a very important conversation. As Councilor Garrison has pointed out, we have a crisis in our city when it comes to housing and whether or not people can afford housing in our city. At my hearing last November on gentrification of Roxbury, this certainly came up. Right now, we need to look at all the tools and see what can work and what can't work. We need to make sure that all the voices are around the table. I certainly hear the concerns that my colleagues have already voiced in terms of what this could mean for small landlords. I'm a small landlord. I, too, have always tried to keep my rents below market rate because I believe in attracting good people who want to stay and build that community with them. But that being said, this is an important conversation, and we need to have this conversation because we need to be looking at everything. This city is It is too expensive for the current residents in our city, particularly our young people who are coming up. I know so many young people who are doubling up. They can't move out of their parents' home because they just can't afford it. There are our elders who are facing a similar crunch, who have, maybe a house that they can no longer maintain. So we need to be looking at all the tools in the toolbox, this being one of them. I think it's very important as we have this conversation, as Councilor Edwards has already pointed out, that we are not doing the finger pointing, that we're not doing the blame game, but we can really have a conversation about what affordability in our city is and isn't, and what we need to be doing about it so that people who live in our city can continue to stay in our city. So thank you for bringing this forward. I look forward to having a productive conversation.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. Anyone looking to speak on this matter or add their name? Oh, I'm sorry. Councilor Siomo, you have the floor.
Just real brief. I'm in total agreement with Councilor McCarthy and Baker. Again, I have a two-family. I've owned it 26 years. I also have two millennial sons who find it difficult to rent a home in our community without the family subsidy, which they are partaking. One of them is partaking of as we speak. But that's what family do for each other. I would like to just point out that in this conversation, I think we can all do better. However, the city of Boston has the highest deed-restricted units in the United States of America. I want to also point to our friends in our suburbs who can't even get to 10%. And we talk about concentrations of poverty, wealth gaps. We need our suburban friends and neighbors to step up, build more housing that will relieve pressure on our city. It's time. It's time. And I was here during the recession when we were doing layoffs and closing 25 schools in the matter of a couple of years. Print department. In the print department, Frank, I'm so sorry. But we've come a long way since then. The value in my home from 2008 to 2012 went down. No one was crying a river for me or my tenants that I didn't raise their rents for 7 years in a row. But I did that because I wanted to keep them, and they were good tenants. And to Frank's point, that's what good landlords do, small landlords do. That's why I voted against the Airbnb, because we're pushing all the eligibility to those homeowners in neighborhoods that do provide cheaper rent than the bigger landlords. So I just think we should be careful. I think rent control didn't work. It degraded neighborhoods. People didn't invest. If we go it alone on rent control, we can just say goodbye to all the development coming in and investment coming in. We have the CPA due to the leadership of the President and Councilor Flaherty to provide more affordable housing options. I'd be open to even more home ownership to provide pathways for people of color to get wealth. I mean, small businesses is a great way, but what is a better way to build wealth than through your home equity? I wouldn't have been able to buy the condo I just moved into without the equity from my two-family. So I just think we should be cautious. I think it's maybe a conversation. I don't know if I'd spend a lot of time on it, quite honestly. I think there's better ways to have government provide those assistance, not the private market, because I think the unintended consequences would be disastrous for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo. Anyone else looking to speak on this matter or add their name? Docket, let me just get back to the docket. Docket 0649 will be assigned to the Committee on Government Operations.
Docket 0650, Councilor O'Malley offered the following order for hearing on the feasibility of curbside composting in the city of Boston.
Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Albert Einstein is often credited with the quotation, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result." Well, I, for one, much prefer Sir Winston Churchill's quotation, which is never, ever, 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 ever give up. That is why, for the 6th time, I am introducing a hearing order on creating a curbside composting program in the city of Boston. Now, there's a renewed sense of urgency on this, and I want to, I can explain the benefits, but you've all heard me talk about this ad nauseum. I want to come at it from a different angle, and that is that it is financially responsible of us to go forward with this program, recognizing that there will be some costs up front. The fact of the matter is that cities are seeing the commodity, the value of recycling, drop precipitously. When I was first elected to this body in November 30th, 2010, following year's budget, so my first full budget process was 2011, we were generating a revenue of about, $5 or $6 per ton of recycling we were generating as a city. We were paying about $80 per ton for the trash pickup fee. Now, the current rate we're paying is about $25. The current rate for trash is slightly north of that, maybe $85, $86. Recycling, instead of generating a revenue of $5 per ton, we're paying $25 per ton. So we've seen a $30 change. That's pretty dramatic. It's no longer worth what it once was. It's not a commodity the way it was before, but it's still beneficial to every taxpayer for us to recycle more because the cost is dramatically less than landfill. We're currently looking at the new contract, and what we're seeing, this trend in Boston, which has been borne out in city after city, really across the United States, and it gets into sort of the weeds about how foreign markets are no longer accepting our recycling, but the cost of recycling is eclipsing the cost of trash and landfill. And you've seen over $100 per ton to pick up recycling when traditional trash is still high 80s, low $90. Think about that for a second. What you have in some cities, and I know, and I've talked to the mayor directly about this and his team, and we are absolutely committed to never burying our recycling, but you do have some cities that are doing that, some states that are doing that. And that is a chilling concept when we really have 12 years to get it right. So that's why this time I'm feeling bullish on our chances. If we can actually create curbside composting, we can divert at a minimum 20% of our trash, our traditional waste stream, from the landfill into a renewed life. Curbside composting works. We can use it back in our city parks and playgrounds. We can make it an opportunity for residents to take advantage of, as they do in countless other cities. Cambridge started a piloted program around the same time I had first introduced this. They did a piloted program in a small area. It's been so successful that it's expanded citywide, even though it's only the first full year since they've been doing curbside composting. They've seen a waste reduction of 8%. That's just in the first year. There are 100 municipalities nationwide that have some sort of a program. Portland, Oregon saw their decreased trash percentage by nearly 40%. It was 37%. In San Francisco diverts more than 80% of its waste from landfills, and they've been doing curbside composting for a number of years. In 2017, last year, we collected 190,000 tons of waste. We could divert, as I said, over 20%, about 40,000 tons of waste every year. 40,000 times $80 or $89 per tonnage, that's real savings right there. Admittedly, there will be a cost associated with creating this program, and I really think we ought to pilot it, and I can think of one or two neighborhoods that would really benefit and really have already seen a number of adopters, but that's the way we can make this work. We could save between 25 and 33% in tipping fees. That is a remarkable figure, and that once again proves that every fiscal conservative ought to be an environmentalist. And as the stewards of the city, and our budget process really began in earnest this morning, we have fiduciary responsibility to our citizens, to our constituents, to do what we can. This is a great opportunity of strong policy that is going to do the right thing, help the environment, and save ratepayer money. And a little bit later, we're going to hear about the Green New Deal, obviously something that I support, and I appreciate efforts that have been underway. I'm appreciating what we've been able to do as a body on lead on a lot of those issues for many, many years. But one thing that I think the Green New Deal has really highlighted is this intersectionality of jobs and the new economy, the green economy, so-called green-collar jobs. And I was talking with my dear colleague from District 3, the idea of building our own anaerobic digester where we could do some of this stuff on site would create jobs and provide a remarkable service, not only benefiting the people in Boston, but we could really look elsewhere in greater Boston. This could be something that generates eventually tens of millions of dollars of revenue for the city of Boston while diverting our waste stream, while building a greener city, greener country, greener world. I'm really excited about this, and I am really hopeful that we can finally get this done. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Madam President, please add my name, and also I was there in August of 2018 when I thought we were really close. So you have my full support in efforts to try to get that. And at the very least, we should be talking about a pilot program. We've got a lot of successful pilot programs here in Boston. I know that we did one on the sandwich boards. I know that there's been a pilot program around recycling. There's been a pilot program around sort of surge pricing around our parking meters. Street cleaning, we've had a pilot program around sort of whether we should tow cars or not. So at the very least, we should be talking about picking a neighborhood where we can do a pilot program. So again, look forward to an expedited hearing on this, and hopefully we can pick up where that last working session left off, which I thought we were almost at the point of having a program. So kudos to our colleague for his great work on this, and again, please add my name and like to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Baker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I'd like to congratulate my good colleague from West Roxbury on this here 6 times. Maybe this will be the charm here, Matt. But I have to agree with where he's going. And I don't know if people remember, I brought Bruce Fulford in here a couple years ago, and he had a plan for a digester over in your district, I think, Madam President. And if we looked at it as a way, now in the 70s, we lost all of our, City of Boston used to collect our own trash. We had our own trash trucks, those sorts of things. And for whatever reason, we got away from that model. So now what happens, we couldn't even get back, well, we could if we had, if we wanted to, but we won't get back in that space. And that's costing us probably $100 million plus a year. And I think that this presents itself with a new opportunity. If we were forward thinking and we built our own digester, put our own people there to work, because this is also part of the new economy. This is something that isn't happening. So if we were on the front end of it, made the initial investment, built the infrastructure, I think we could use it as a job pathway also. I'm excited about this, Matt. I think, you know, maybe this time it'll work. In New York City, they do compost drop-off at train stations that go to Red Hook to a community group that does all the composting there, which the material goes out to community gardens and whoever else wants the material. But teaching kids, young adults from that neighborhood how to compost, it's a whole new industry. And I think if we thought about it, and when we're having the discussion, if we keep the operation of it in-house is what I think will really pay dividends for us. We'll cut our tipping costs, and then we'll also be able to train people for new jobs and hopefully have a better, more healthy city. And add my name, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. And I just want to say thank you to Councilor O'Malley for his long-time work and leadership on this important environmental issue. Madam President, I'd like to respectfully ask if my name could be added. And I just want to highlight, as Councilor Flaherty mentioned, maybe considering a pilot program. One of the issues I've been focused on over the last year and a half is trying to provide as much services to the Chinatown community. We have a lot of restaurants there, and I think we also could be doing a better job with this type of program with curbside compost, but also working closely with our business owners, our restaurant owners, to make sure that food waste is handled properly. And if it's not handled properly, it also becomes a public health issue as well. So I just want to say thank you to Councilor O'Malley for excellent leadership. I had the opportunity to spend Saturday at the Berkeley Community Garden in the South End, and I saw a lot of the people there also using the fertilizer from this type of program. And it was a real diverse group of people at this community garden. There was Asians, there was young professionals, there was African Americans, but everyone was working together in making sure that our environment is healthy, that there's food access as well. And so it was just a great opportunity to see what a community can do by working together. And again, thank you to Councilor O'Malley for your important work on this important initiative. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Madam Clerk, if you could add Councillor Flynn, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor Baker, as well as Councillor Siomo, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Janey, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Wu, Councillor Zakem, as well as the Chair. Docket 0650 will be assigned to the Committee on Environment, Sustainability, and Parks.
Docket number 0651, Councillor Janey offered the following resolution in support of full-time, non-tenured track faculty at Northeastern University.
Councillor Janey, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam President. One of the things that I really enjoy about working on this body with all of you is your deep commitment to workers. The City Council has been very active in advocating for workers, whether it was standing with Local 26 when they were on strike, the hotel workers there, whether we were talking about the locked out National Grid workers, or whether it was advocating for employees over at Whittier Health Center when they were organizing and wanted to form a union. So I really appreciate that about this body. As a city councilor representing District 7, I'm very proud to introduce this resolution in support of non-tenure track full-time faculty at Northeastern University, who yesterday took the courageous step of filing for a union election with the National Labor Relations Board. As someone who has been a strong advocate for education in this city, I know how important it is to have the voices of educators who are trying to support our students, listening to those voices of those educators. Northeastern is a global leader in higher education. They provide important experiential learning opportunities and classes that are often designed for working professionals. It historically has provided important educational opportunities for Roxbury residents, including my father, who graduated in 1969 with a bachelor's in sociology. And in 1973, he got his master's in education from Northeastern before going on to BU for his doctorate. However, in recent years, there's been a lot of tension between Northeastern and its host community of Roxbury. We've seen Northeastern rapidly increase its physical footprint in terms of encroaching on the neighborhood. There's a lack of student housing, so that puts a lot of pressure on the housing market, which is we've already discussed here how important that is in making sure that we have housing for all of our residents. Northeastern also has not paid its fair share in pilot, and I know how important that is for folks on this body, and so we can do better. Now it seems that Northeastern has taken steps to prevent educators from having a vote on whether or not to form a union. Last November 2018, the non-tenure track full-time faculty of Northeastern University filed for a union election with the National Labor Board, but the response from Northeastern was to declare that these employees were managerial and therefore not eligible to form a union. In order to, well, the last thing that I'll say, because I'm rambling on too long, the last thing that I will say that this is not about beating up on Northeastern. As I've already indicated, it's a fine institution, provides a great education for those who get into Northeastern, but we do need to make sure that workers are being supported and that they are able to organize if they choose to do so. And so, you know, as a body, we've been very supportive of workers, as I've already mentioned, and it's important that we continue to stand with workers to ensure that they have working conditions that work for them and that we're doing all that we can. And the other thing, so not the last thing I'll say, I'm going to add this, the importance of the labor movement in terms of really creating the middle class and making sure that we have the wages and the benefits for employees to actually live in a city like Boston. So when we talk about the affordability crisis in housing, in large part, we just talk about housing and we need more housing. We've got to make sure that people have the wages that they can afford the housing in the city of Boston. We've got to have an economic strategy as well. So I do see this as an economic justice issue, standing with workers. I'm proud to do so as a city councilor, and I know you guys have been great in the past, and I hope that you will join me in supporting this principle of free union election one more time, and I seek suspension of the rules and passage of this resolution, and I hope that you will all sign on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Janey. Councillor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to respectfully ask that my name be added. Councilor Janey said it best. You know, unions provide a decent wage. They provide great health care, working conditions, but they also provide respect and dignity. And, Madam President, over the weekend, I had the opportunity to attend the New England Jewish Labor Seder in Brookline, and where Councilor Janey mentioned, they recognize the Unite 26 workers, the hotel workers. They also recognize the steel workers that took on National Grid. I saw a lot of the Mass Nurses Association there as well. But it was a group of people, workers. They recognized the Boston building trades for doing outstanding work in our city also. But what the labor movement means to me and means to the City Council is making sure that the voices of workers and those without a voice really in society is treated fairly, is treated with respect, treated with dignity. They have access to health care. They have access to a safe working conditions. Collective bargaining is an important part of it. So I'm proud of the work Councilor Janey is doing, and I'm proud of the work this City Council has done, especially over the last year and a half, in standing up for working men and women and working families and low-wage workers. We have a great relationship with Community Labor United also. I was with Councilor Janey during the lockout of the steel workers when Community Labor United joined us down at the South Boston waterfront, and it was a group of concerned, a lot of women, concerned women, communities of color, that they came forward and they said, what is important here is we all stand up when we see injustice and stand with the working men and women of the steel workers. So I'm proud of the Community Labor United, but also all of our unions that fight for working families across Boston and across Massachusetts. So just want to respectfully add my name and thank Councilor Janey for her work and supporting working men and women for many years as well. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I wanted to thank the maker for this resolution, absolutely add my name. I want to thank the organizers of 509 and making sure that all workers have a voice. I think that this is something that we've done consistently. We've stood with our colleagues that they passed resolutions for the steel workers when we were going up against public utilities with National Grid. We have consistently said one thing, and that's when workers rise, we rise with them. They stand on our shoulders, and we are going to fight to make sure that workers are recognized and valued in the city of Boston. When they move to speak, and we are going to be their megaphone and ensure that we amplify their voices for civil rights and for workers' rights. And we don't back down if it is against a nonprofit, especially a nonprofit as large as Northeastern. They are an employer. They are not lacking the funds to do this, to pay their workers a fair wage. Not every year when they're raising their tuition. That's not an excuse that they have. And they certainly don't have the excuse that they don't practice, or excuse me, that they don't teach these values of civil rights, of history, of workers' rights. We're just simply saying to them, rise to the standards that you teach your students every year, that you increase your tuitions every year to teach them. We're asking that you simply be consistent. Where you talk about civil rights, where you talk about workers' rights, we ask that you hold yourself to those very standards that you teach about. This is an excellent university. I've been there many times to talk about displacement, to talk about housing, to use their law school and many of their first-year law students to help fight against human trafficking. The university and the students do not lack dedication to social justice. The administration apparently needs to listen to their students and needs to listen to their workers. So we, as a city council, are going to, of course, stand with those workers to make sure that they're seen. One of the first things usually oppressive employers do, however, is to deny someone's status as a worker. To either say that they're a student, say that they're in management, to say that you're not really a worker. And what that really says is we don't really value what you do. We don't value, we will not call it work. It's certainly not voluntary, it's certainly extremely hard, and the degrees that they require a lot of this faculty to come on to even speak to their students They require those high standards, and we certainly believe they should be compensated for that. So, of course, I stand with my colleague, Councillor Janey, and your leadership. Thank you so much for this resolution. We stand with the workers. We stand with SCLU 509. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Anyone else looking to speak on this matter? At this time, Madam Clerk, if you could add Councillor Flynn, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Baker, Councillor Siomo, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor Garrison, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor O'Malley, Councillor Wu, Councillor Zachem, as well as the Chair. Councillor Janey seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket or adoption of docket 0651. All in favor of adoption say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0651 has been adopted.
Docket number 0652, Councilor Wu offer the following resolution, that the Boston City Council go on record in support of House Resolution 109 and Senate Resolution 59, a resolution recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal.
Councilor Wu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I want to piggyback on Councillor O'Malley's remarks today and over many, many weeks in just emphasizing the urgency and the scale of what we are facing. I think both of us had spoken, and several others, back in October when the United Nations released their report emphasizing that there was just a limited window of 12 years to go before we reach the point at which emissions and therefore temperatures will be warmer, then we will be able to pull back and essentially create climate catastrophe in a way that humans will no longer be able to inhabit multiple parts of the world. Food production systems will be out of whack, and we will be in even more dire straits. The climate crisis is here now. We see it in Boston every single year. We are working on it as much as we can at the city level, but we know this window is shrinking. Even since that 12 years was started, the time started on 12 years, we're now 6 months in. So we're down to 11 and a half years to really figure this out. And as much as we do locally, we are pushing on curbside composting, we're pushing on net zero, we're pushing on emissions, we're pushing on transportation, we're pushing on food systems, we're pushing on housing, connecting it all to jobs and economic opportunity. But at some point, the federal government has to wake up. And we want to make sure that, I want to make sure that we are doing our part to lend our voices to this current push, and also to be getting ready, because whether it is for this push now or a next iteration of it, at some point we will get the policy momentum codified, and cities will have to actually be ready to go on projects that we are seeking funding on. So thinking about fare-free transportation, thinking about being able to retrofit every residential home to be climate adapted. These are the things that we need federal support on, and we need to make sure that we are standing with our cities around the country and with our state and federal delegation as they're asking for this as soon as possible. So would like to ask for suspension and adoption today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Anyone else looking to speak on this matter? Councilor Garrison, you have the floor.
Madam President, I rise in opposition to this particular legislation. Stop the green. I will say specifically what I heard on the radio this morning, the ad. It says, stop the green, cut the prescription drugs for elderly. And that is the reason I cannot support this particular legislation.
Thank you, Councilor Garrison. Anyone else looking first to speak on this matter? Because we obviously have oh, sorry, Councilor Edwards, you have the floor. I was looking at you. You pressed now. Okay. Councilor Edwards, you have the floor.
I rise in support of my colleague and her leadership in making sure that while this may be a federal conversation directly, that locally we will receive the impact of their indecision or their inaction in making sure that we are planning on an economy and also a future that is green. I am firmly supportive of this resolution, and I do think our leadership locally and our at least acknowledgement that this is a conversation that we support is powerful. I want to rise and thank the Maker, especially because if we do not push locally, as our counselor, my dear colleague, Matt O'Malley, has been doing for years, then at the very minimum, we're not making ourselves aware, and we're completely hiding our head in the sand. So I actually think that you can both be green and also assure that we are cutting prescription prices for our elderly. So I don't think the two are in conflict. I do think it's important to acknowledge the needs of our seniors, but also acknowledge that they also need a greener planet as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Janey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just rise in support of the strong leadership of my colleague, Councillor Wu, with the Green New Deal resolution, as well as Councillor Matt O'Malley for his leadership on all things green on the City Council. Regardless of what happens in Washington, D.C., it is important that we as a city continue to lead on these issues. We are destroying our planet, and we need to make sure that we are doing all that we can to ensure that our young people for generations to come will have a place to call home. All the other things that we're talking about, affordable housing, education, jobs, supporting workers, none of this matters if we destroy our planet. And so we have to act with urgency, and I'm in full support of this resolution. And thank you for your leadership, Councilor Wu, and thank you, Councilor Matt O'Malley, for all of the things that you have put forth, including the composting for the 6th time. And I'm supportive of that. I didn't speak when you mentioned it, but I'm very supportive of that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Janey. Anyone looking to add their name to this? Okay, at this time, if you could add, Madam Clerk, Councillor Zachem, I'm going to actually go this way, Councillor Zachem, Councillor O'Malley, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Janey, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor Edwards, as well as the Chair. At this time, Councillor Wu seeks suspension of the rules and adoption of docket 0652. All those in favor of suspension of the rules and adoption, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Nay. And is this an objection to, I guess we have to sort of pull this apart now. There's obviously on the table a suspension of the rules and an adoption of the docket. Is there an objection by councilors to suspend the rules? Okay. And then now moving on, Madam Clerk, to take a roll on adoption of this resolution.
Councillor Baker? No. Councillor Baker, no. Councillor Campbell?
Yes.
Councillor Campbell, yes. Councillor Siomo? Councillor Siomo, no. Councillor Edwards? Yes. Councillor Edwards, yes. Councillor Asabi George? Councillor Flaherty? Councillor Flaherty, yes. Councillor Flynn? Yes. Councillor Flynn, yes. Councillor Garrison? No. Councillor Garrison, no. Councillor Janey? Yes. Councillor Janey, yes. Councillor McCarthy? Yes. Councillor McCarthy, yes. Councillor O'Malley? Yes. Councillor O'Malley, yes. Councillor Wu? Yes. Councillor Wu, yes. Councillor Zachem? Yes. Councillor Zachem, yes. Madam President, we have 3 in the negative and 9 in the affirmative.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Docket 0652 has been adopted. Moving on to personnel orders.
Docket number 0653 is withdrawn. Docket 0654, Councillor Campbell for Councillor Edwards.
Councillor Edwards seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket 0654. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0654 has been passed.
Docket number 0655, Councillor Campbell for Councillor Edwards.
Councillor Edwards seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket 0655. All those in favor of passage say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0655 has been passed. Moving right along, I am informed by the clerk that there is one late file matter, which in absence of objection will be added to today's agenda. Just for clarification, it is a personnel order for Councillor Asabi George. Hearing and seeing no objections, the late file matter is added to the agenda. Madam Clerk, if we could read that into the record.
Thank you, Madam President. April 10th, 2019, Councillor Campbell for Councillor Asabi George ordered.
Councillor Asabi George seeks suspension of the rules and passage of the late file matter. All those in favor of passage say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The late file matter has been passed. Anyone looking to remove a matter from the green sheets? Moving right along, I am informed by the clerk that there is green sheets? Oh, thank you, Councilor Malley. I'm informed by the clerk that there is one late file matter which in the absence of objection will be added to the consent agenda. Hearing and seeing no objections, the late file matter is added. The chair moves for adoption of the consent agenda at this time. All those in favor of adoption say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The consent agenda is adopted. Moving on to announcements. Councilor Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask for unanimous consent to make a brief statement about the Boston Marathon.
Any objections? No. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. It's been a great tradition that I've been proud to have brought to this body, where on typically the Wednesday before the marathon, we as a collective body have honored Boston Marathon legends. We began with Dave McGilvery, the race director. Then it was Team Hoyt, Rick and Dick Hoyt, for an incredibly emotional day. Jack Foltz, winner of the 1976 race. Joan Benoit Samuelson. Last year we had Des Linden, the winner, the women's winner of last year's race. We had her in June. We obviously don't have a presentation today, but I am honored that the last late file to the consent agenda, because we were just able to put it together at the last minute, but this Sunday, this body will be honoring Meb Kevleski, the last American male to win the race. Many of you know Meb. He embodies the notion of Boston Strong. It was particularly emotional as he won the 2014 marathon 1 year after the attacks. He had Martin Richard, Lindsay Liu, Sean Collier, and Crystal Campbell's initials on his bib. He's an amazing guy, so I'll be presenting that on behalf of this body to Meb on Sunday morning at 9:30. If anyone's interested in coming, let me know. The more the merrier, but it'll be great that this body really recognizes Meb and continues to recognize the marathon, and then I know many of us will be out watching it. It's my favorite day of the year, and it's a great celebration. The weather is either going to be perfect for runners or awful for runners. It's really teetering right now, so remains to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Malley. Councilor Edwards, you have the floor.
It's just a brief announcement. As many of you are fully aware that April is the month of the military child. And I am one of those folks, but so welcome to my month. But I wanted also to acknowledge that kinship that I have with folks all over the world who are military children, but to our veteran serving here on the council, and to our my colleague and friend Tim McCarthy, who is both a military child and has a child in the military. So I wanted to just acknowledge that today. Thank you both for your service, and that's it.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to provide a little information to my colleagues on the passing of a World War II veteran in my community. His name was Ed Hamilton. He was a friend of mine. He was a friend of Councilor Flaherty's. He was also a friend of Mayor Walsh as well. Ed Hamilton was 95 years old. He was a father. He was a grandfather, and he was a great-grandfather, and he was also a Pearl Harbor survivor. He was well respected in South Boston. He was well liked in South Boston. He worked with Mayor Walsh in Operation Thank-A-Vet, and even at his age of in his early 90s, he was always trying to help other people, help other veterans and other military families get the services and programs that they've earned. So, you know, I'm going to be at the wake today, and I'll make sure I represent all of my colleagues here in government. But I just wanted to let you know that on the passing of a wonderful American hero, Ed Hamilton, and we're going to miss him. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Anyone else looking to make an announcement? All right, at this time, I ask all councilors, guests, and staff to please rise as we adjourn today's meeting in memory of the following individuals. For Councilor Flynn, Donna Marie Coakley. For Councilor Siomo, Geraldine Wong. Karen Kaz Fales and Robert George. For Councilor Zakem, Robert Michael Adler. For Councilors Flynn, Flaherty, and Baker, Ed Hamilton. For the chair and Councilor Janey, Eleanor Maloney. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. The chair moves that when the council adjourns today, it does so in memory of those aforementioned individuals. We are scheduled to meet again in this chamber at Boston City Hall on Wednesday, April 24th at 12 noon. All those in favor of adjournment say aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The council is adjourned. Thank you, Madam